Okay, hi guys. Hi everyone. I think this is, let me hit record so we have a recording of it as well. And I hope you're all doing awesome. I hope the audio is all right, so just let me know if everything is okay there. And yeah, welcome to the Founders Only CSS Demystified course here, or live training that we're going to try out. And hopefully it's a lot of fun. Hopefully we cover some stuff that is new to you and helps you out with your CSS stuff. Before we get started though, I just want to say a really big thank you for pre-purchasing CSS Demystified. So many more people signed up for it than I was expecting. Like, I was thinking maybe 100 and we're close to 400, so that's absolutely mind-blowing to me. So really, a really big thank you for jumping on in and trusting that we'd have a good course here. I'll be answering questions about the course itself as well as we go through this training session, and this will be available for, I'll have a recording of it posted on the actual page for CSS Demystified eventually. I'll probably try and get that up for tomorrow. Let's check out in the chat. Yeah, it looks like audio is good, so that is good. Awesome. Hi, everybody. Lots of people in here. I don't know how many. I had 2 screens for my live streaming usually. I have a laptop, but oh, wait. We got 52 people here. That's really awesome. I wasn't sure how many people would actually make it to the live session. I know it's really hard for timing. And I'm going to let you guys know, I've decided to make a pretty big change to the course. And I got the colors, put my blazer on to feel more professory. It's been a while since I've done any real teaching, like lesson plan teaching. So I'm excited for this. But I've made a pretty big decision for the course to make a change to it a little bit. It gives you more content than we were originally going to have. So originally it was going to be the 3 hours of content or 3 hours of content, 3 weeks of content. And what I've decided is each week we'll also have a live session to it. So we'll be doing each week has its own purpose. And at the end of each week, I'll have a live session where I'll go back over the material, go a bit deeper into the material, and also do a little bit more. So once the course comes out, and I'll answer questions and all of that. So this is sort of a trial to how those lives are going to go a little bit. Though this one's a little bit more structured. This is a bit of a mix of the type of content you'll see. I have slides ready. We're going to go through the slides. We're going to take what we learned from the slides, put it into code, and have some fun with it, hopefully. I'm having some problems with my mic. It sounds like audio is okay now. My kids are always on my computer, and the connection of where the mic, where the plugs in, is really not, it's hanging on by a thread, but it seems to be working now, so that's good to know. Awesome. And there's people from all over the place tuning in from work. Jill's here from work. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you don't get in trouble. Also, just in case, I've announced it on my newsletter, so you guys might know, but I've actually gone to doing this stuff full time now. So I have made the jump from teaching full-time at school to now teaching full-time online. So big change for me. So got a fresh pot of coffee just for this, so we should be good to go. And it looks like, okay, so I guess what I'm going to do, my plan for this is we're going to get started with, I'm really not used, I keep looking down because I have my face on here. I'm not used to being so close to the camera, but my webcam's not perfect. The lighting's not as good as I would like it, but that's okay. What my plan for this stream is we're going to run through, and I just realized I closed OBS, but that means I can't change my scenes, so I'll have to leave that open. Or I can pop this out. I'm going to leave that open. Sorry. I've just started doing live streams a little bit. I'm still trying to get in the swing of it. So yeah, the plan for this is we're going to do a lesson on intrinsic and extrinsic sizing in CSS, what it means, why it's important to know, the whole point of CSS Demystified is to sort of go into these things about CSS that people don't think about very much, or don't hear about, or don't learn about. And it's the things that I think can make a really big difference. This wasn't originally part of the course, but when I decided to do a live stream, I wanted to find something that made sense to fit into the course. And I think this is the perfect type of thing. So intrinsic and extrinsic sizing. I was doing this type of stuff without really thinking about, like, I never called it intrinsic or extrinsic. And I often won't say, whatever. I'd just be sort of intuitively using it because I knew how the different properties worked. But when you know about these things, when different things apply, it's when CSS starts getting a lot easier. And this course is all about that. I want to make it so CSS starts becoming an easier language for you to be able to manipulate and to use. Yeah, I know I need lighting here. I don't have a light on this side anywhere that I could use. The lighting would look a lot better if I had something there, but it's funny because if I'm using my actual camera, like I do on YouTube, like it's the exact same lighting that I have now. But when I do that, I think it looks okay. My background's a mess too. I need to do something with this. Intrinsic versus say that 3 times fast. It is easier to say than, let's see if I can get it. Specificity. There we go. Maybe if I don't think about it, it'll go better. Oh, another thing I just saw, Sebek asked about the Discord community. So if you're not in the Discord, I'm going to mention it again in the Q&A at the end, but there's a link in the description for this video to the Discord. I'd encourage you to come and join. But there is a private section for course members, but I don't have a way to get you in there yet. So once I figure out a good way to get people into that, because if you're already part of the Discord server, it's hard to change the rules without manually doing it. So I'm seeing if I can come up with a clever solution, but that will be another thing that we will have. MSV, why not Twitch too for monetization? Just curious what you mean by that, but I will, I am on Twitch now. I'm doing these live streams on YouTube because I only want it to be for founding members, and I can do an unlisted video like this one is. So, but otherwise I will be streaming on Twitch from now on. Speckly Fish City. I like that, Dave. Nice. Sebek, that's too nice of you. I just don't want either me or Sebek to be overwhelmed by requests to add the role. So I'm trying to find an automatic way to do it. All right, so let's get started with this. Let's see if I can figure out how to switch scenes properly. Shoot live. There we go. Oops, we shouldn't see that. Okay, so I'm trying to find a better way to do the slides because I did make them into PDFs, and I know there's other ways of doing this stuff, but I can't stand slide software and I don't use my entire screen, so we're sticking with the PDFs. So welcome to CSS Demystified. Start writing CSS with confidence. And in this one, as I mentioned, we'll be talking about intrinsic and extrinsic sizing. So that is the topic of this one live lesson. And actually, I just want to, sorry, is this? I am there. Okay. I wasn't sure if I was on screen or not. So I'm just going to quickly run over what extrinsic or I'm going to run through both of them. So we have intrinsic and extrinsic. And for most people, that doesn't mean anything at all. So extrinsic sizing, the specification says that it determines sizes based on the context of an element without regard for its contents, which I mean, that's what it does, but in other words, it's when an element's dimensions are determined not by the content that's inside that element, but by other factors. Sorry, the chat's distracting me. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to ignore the chat a little bit while I run through this. Well, actually, I have questions for you guys. Let's get to the questions, but I'll try and stay on topic as much as possible. And then at the end, we'll get into the Q&A and I'll pay a bit more attention. So extrinsic sizing is when dimensions are determined not by the content, but by other factors. And even I don't know if my description is actually better than their description or not, to be honest. But other factors, like ignoring content, what could, and by content, here, let's just open up Codepens for a second. So all the lessons here, I will share the links to all these in here. So here I have some stuff. I have a container here. And my container, like right now, well, this does, whatever, it doesn't matter. Here we have a container and it doesn't have a size on it. But is this extrinsic sizing? Is it based on the content that's inside of it, or is it based on something else? And in this case, it's not based on the content that's inside of it, because even if we had no content in there, let's just add some padding so we can see it. Padding of 5em. And come on, there we go. And I'll make this like 20 pixels so we can actually see the border. And even though there's no width on this, it has its own size. So the content isn't what's controlling the size of my container. So that means the width of it is extrinsic, because it's something, it's the width of the element itself, which is controlling the size. And so just coming back to my PDF for a second, the default width of an element is an extrinsic size. Most elements have a default width of 100% or auto, which ends up being 100%. But you can also set a size on an element. So anytime you set a size that's an extrinsic size, you can also think of extrinsic as explicit. It's a little bit like the explicit and implicit grid. Not quite the same thing, but like it's something that you set yourself. So if we go back to here, often on a container, we'll have something like width 80%, max width 900 pixels. And now this has an I guess margin 0 auto to center it, margin 0 auto. And now this has an extrinsic size. Oh, I didn't put a border box. That's okay. So it's 900 pixels wide. I'm telling it should be 900 pixels wide. This is extrinsic sizing, and it's something we never think about because it's the way most things work. So it's really straightforward. Like maybe we're overcomplicating it by naming it, but I do think that knowing what things are called can actually help in the long run, because then you can have conversations about it. So yeah, here the Magger said specifying the width directly would be extrinsic. That's exactly what we're talking about. Seebeck saying that I didn't make my slides, and I actually found a really cool thing. I forget what it's called now, but it was like a way to make a web page, like a slide deck through a website. And I started with that, and I was actually wasting so much time trying to get it to be perfect. So I just made it all in InDesign instead, because I'm comfortable with that. And it, yeah, it did bite me a little bit though, because I changed the style, and now I have to change the style for each one of them. Whereas if I had a CSS file, I could have done it in one shot, but oh well. So extrinsic sizing, it's really straightforward. It's what you're used to doing, and there's nothing too fancy with it. Where things get, all right, let's go take a look. We just did that. The container is extrinsic regarding width, but intrinsic regarding height. Peter, you beat me to it. Exactly. So I was going to get there in a second, but intrinsic sizing is, and this is how the specification describes it, that sizes are based on the contents of an element without regard for its context. And with just the important part here is based on the contents of an element. So when an element's dimensions are determined by the content that's inside of it. That's what intrinsic sizing is. And again, this is something that we're very used to because, as Peter said, the height of elements is intrinsic. Unless we set it. So like here, this is intrinsic because if I came and if I come in and do paragraph times 10 with some lorem in there, the height of this element is automatically growing, and we take advantage of this all the time. If this didn't happen, it would be a nightmare. So the height is intrinsic to the content. It will grow and shrink based on whatever content is inside of it, and I think all elements behave that way by default. Don't be sorry, Peter. It's awesome. I'm glad that we're all in the right, you're thinking about it the right way. So yeah, so there we have the intrinsic, and I think this is the simplest version of intrinsic, but there is another one. In the chat, you guys, what is a type of element that is intrinsic both in width and, I guess by height as well, but some elements that would be intrinsic, their width by default is intrinsic. That's based on the content that's inside of them. I'll wait for the chat to chime in. I think there's a bit of a delay between my video and that, so I don't want to give it away. Image, I actually don't know if images That's a good one. A few people coming in. Image, video, table. I have a really specific thing in mind. Everybody's saying image. Just before I jump onto the answer, Ben asked if I give a height. So here, if I said height is 500 pixels, is that now extrinsic? And exactly. As soon as you define the width of something or the height of something, it's now become an extrinsic value because it's defined somewhere how big it should be. And this is why we don't, what just happened here with the overflow is why we like not, why we rely on intrinsic heights usually, and why setting heights can be very, very dangerous. But yeah, exactly. I'm curious if an image would be considered. Images are weird because they're replaced elements. I see button. Button's getting close. Span element. Span, a. Good. That's more inline elements. Exactly. Ben nailed it. Inline elements. Actually, images by default are inline. They behave like inline block, but in the spec, they're inline. So I guess images are intrinsic. Yeah, I guess that would make sense. I should have thought about images before I started this. So span, elements, links, all of that are intrinsic. Any inline element is intrinsic. And I had this on my slide, inline elements. They are all intrinsic elements in both their width and their height. They're completely defined by the content that's inside of them. So I did see someone, I didn't see who it was, said paragraph. But paragraphs are, the width of paragraphs is, I was going to say explicit, but it's extrinsic. Just because if I came and I say paragraph has a border of 2 pixels solid red, just so we can see them. Even this paragraph, which is shorter, the width of my paragraph is going all the way to the edge. So block level elements always, the default is 100%. So there is pretty much a width that is set on them. So they're always, the paragraph isn't shrinking to fit the content. The paragraph is still stretching to the full width. So it's not paying attention to the content inside of it. Whereas if I did this on a span, and let's just throw a span in here. And we're going through the real basics right now, but this is about to get a bit more interesting really soon. But here we go. We have this. So the span here, if I add more content inside that span, the size of the span is going to grow. And if I remove content from it, the size of the span is going to shrink. So it's really, the span's width, and it's the same with links. Any inline element, they're always defined by the content that's inside of them, and they're not defined by anything else that we set on them, by default, of course. The HTML, Jeff. I think the HTML is block level. I'm guessing it is, but that's a good question. It's something I've never looked into. That was Jeff B who asked, what about the HTML? By the image. There we go. Thank you, Seebeck. So I guess that's from the spec. Image is a replaced element. It has a display value of inline by default, but its dimensions are defined by the embedded image's intrinsic values. And that does make sense. The image is defined. I mean, that's the weird thing with images. A little bit of a side note here. Images are really weird because and the whole replaced element thing is weird. Unsplash int. Because this tag doesn't really exist here. It's replacing, like here with the paragraph, we're wrapping this text inside a paragraph, whereas like there's no closing image with content inside of this. So like it's replacing this with the content of the source attribute. And the size of it is dependent on that content. So it becomes intrinsic. So that does make sense. Because the bigger or smaller the image, the bigger or smaller the image itself, it defines the size of it. So yeah, it's intrinsic. That does make sense. So moving on from there, and this is the reason I wanted to bring this up at all is, well, I think this is useful to know. I think everyone sort of gets the idea behind or between block level and inline elements. We have block elements stretch, they take up the full width, they stack on top of each other, even if we change the width of them. Inline elements live in line. So if this was the end of it, I don't even think it would be worth bringing up the idea of intrinsic and extrinsic. But CSS has evolved to the point where we can change the behavior of elements to become intrinsic, even though they're normally not, which is really interesting. And there's 3 different behaviors actually that get wrapped up inside of this. So this is where things get a bit more interesting. Some things that do change it that you might be familiar with, though. Forgot about this slide, but so inline elements are the most obvious, but others that come into play are position, absolute, and fixed, and sort of flex items. They're not exactly like that. I don't know if flex items are actually, I should have looked it up, but I don't know if they're considered. I'm pretty sure flex items, because of their part of the Flexbox formatting context, which we have a whole module on in this course, they're their own thing, sort of. But let's just take a really quick look here. Like if I take my first paragraph, I'm going to make the first paragraph a little bit smaller, just so we can see what I'm talking about. And this is an issue that sometimes people run into. So if I do p first of type, and I do, let's give it a background so we can see it. Background is pink. I'll give it a little bit of padding. And there we go. So we see that first paragraph. And then what I'm going to do is give this a position of fixed. And you'll notice when I do position fixed, it shrinks down to match the content that's inside of it. So when we change the positioning of it, we're actually changing it from something that had the default width to something that is intrinsic in width. The content inside the paragraph is now defining the size of that element. And it's why a lot of the time, say you want to fix navigation, not only do you have to do the position fix, but then you either have to do the left and right 0, or you have to give it the width of 100% to get it back to being the full size. So that is something that can come up. Sometimes people get a little bit confused by what's happening there. So I do think that's important to know. And hey, Denny's. Sorry, we just got some new people dropping in, or at least one. Ben's asking a div with a display of inline. That would also do the same thing. Yanis is a few good questions here. Okay, we're gonna answer these questions. Something that's an inline block element, that the width of that would become intrinsic, because once again, it's based on an inline block and an inline element are almost exactly the same. The only difference is that the inline block, you can put heights and margin top and bottom, right? And padding top and bottom work properly. So the width of it is then intrinsic. It's based on the content that's inside of it. And if you did give a div or any other block element a display of inline, excuse me, then it would definitely, it is becoming the width of it is becoming intrinsic. Yeah. And I just want to look quick. The one thing I really don't want you guys to get too caught up on is the terminology. Like, I think it's good that we know that it's intrinsic and extrinsic. I do think that the more there's a few different, even like the first week of the course, I'm going to be talking about one of the very first lessons in the course is just looking at like the rule, like what do you call it? Like a selector, a property, and a value. And it's not a long lesson, but I just want to make sure that that everybody knows the right terminology for everything we're talking about, because I do think that makes discussion and questions and answering a lot easier when we're using the right terminology. But it's, I was aware of a lot of this without knowing it was intrinsic and extrinsic. So just, it is. You're familiar with these behaviors already. You know that when it's inline, it's being controlled by the width. You know when it's display block that it's getting controlled by the, or it has a width, right? It's full width, or if you set a specific width on it, you can change that. So I don't want you to walk away from this a bit more confused by just because we're coming up with these fancy words to describe those behaviors. And when I say flex items, sort of, I'm sure do I have a flex there? No. Or here, even just really fast, like if I do a display flex, body display flex here, you know, these are sort of becoming, I mean, they're becoming intrinsically sized because they're shrinking down to fit the content that's inside of them. So my header, my main, like these three parts of the site are shrinking to fit. And so it's exactly like what I just did here when I did display fixed, or not display fixed, position fixed. When we have an inline element or a flex element, it's shrinking to fit its content. And again, I have a whole part of the course, so I'm not going to dive too deep into this behavior here. But it is really important to know when you do a display flex on a parent, it doesn't matter what display properties the children have anymore. Those go out the window. If you have if it's fixed, I think it's obviously different or absolute. But if you have a display block, display inline, like forget it. That doesn't exist in the world of Flexbox. So that is important to know. So if we keep on, I just realized this isn't the full size that we want it to be. One sec, just give me a sec. There, that'd be better. Give us a bit more room to work with. Now the other thing with intrinsic sizing is, and this is what I said, that sort of is exciting and opens up a lot more possibilities when it comes to your layouts. And it's that there's new values that we have to be able to make elements have intrinsic sizing, but it's not just the intrinsic that we saw with an inline element. It actually opens up a lot more possibility in terms of how things work. And I find they're a little bit fringe in that you're not going to be using them on every single project in like all over the place, but they're the types of things that when they do come up are super useful. And so like they're the solutions to problems that we used to have. So they can be very, very useful. So and one big thing with CSS that I like to say is it's not always important to memorize everything about it. There's too much. What's really important is knowing that it's possible and that I'm sure I've heard something about this, and then being able to figure out what it is after that. Like I've gone back over my own content that I've created just to be able to remember how something works. So like, don't try and remember it all. Just know, be vaguely aware of as much as possible, I think is the most useful skill that you can have with CSS. So these three new values that we have are min content, max content, and fit content. And they're really, really cool. So we're going to explore them a little bit. We'll start with, we're going to go in order. I'm just going to take a little pause to check out the chat to see what's going on. Sourab, sorry for mispronouncing your name, is asking when the course will be uploaded. That's a good question. I wish I had a really good answer for you. I will be sending updates, but I've started working on the material. It's going to be coming available, and I'm hoping I will be giving it access to all of you before I give access to the world, because I also have to run a launch sequence to launch the course. So once the course is ready, I think I can set it up for you guys to start getting access to it. The only thing is I do plan on doing lives, and the live sessions, anyway, I guess I'll talk to you and email you guys. I might run another survey to see what the best way to do it is, actually. Soon, exactly. But it shouldn't be too much longer. 3 weeks? Fingers crossed. So with min content, max content, and fit content, where these really come into play and where they're very useful is, I said I was going to do min first, but we have max first. That's okay. Max is the one that you'll be more familiar with, because max is pretty much, it's going to behave like an inline element. And this is, you're setting these values on the width of an element or on the height of an element. Either one would work. Well, yeah, either one should work. So for max content, it keeps the content inside it at its maximum width, which this is sort of like an inline element works. So in general, you're going to see these with it's text that tends to dictate this. but it is possible that this also comes into play with images, and we're going to see that at the very end in our last example. So with max content, the content will stay at its maximum size. So if you have text in it, we'll keep all the text on one line, and that determines the width of its parent. So a quick example is going back to that first one we had here, where what we could do is on this guy, let's take off this because we don't need it. On my fancy title here, what we could do, and you can see it's even right now it's breaking onto two lines because there's not enough room for it to all fit in here because of the padding and because of the size that I've set on this. So I do find max content a little bit scary. It's not something I use very much, but width, and we can do a max content just like that. And now it forced it to be on a single line. Now technically it's overflowing. So if I change the width of my container to 500, it's going to overflow out the side because it's setting the width of this is the width of the text inside of it. And that's why I put this red line underneath it. That red line is just a pseudo element that has a width that's matching the width of the parent. So we can see that, like, if I don't have that max width on there, max content, I mean, and let's say we give it a lot more room. Do container, I'm just gonna, let's just, padding will be 2, and this can be 1,000. I think we should have enough room that you can see like the red line's actually sticking off the side here because this has a width of auto, which is pretty much 100%. So it's not dictated on the content, it's just dictated on the space available to it right now. So it's stretching all the way to the side there. But as soon as the width becomes max content, this H1 is the size of the text inside of it. So if I take off the word heading, it's shrinking down, and it will, now this is the width. That red bar is showing me the width of this H1. And again, let's turn off this max content. And without that, it's stretching the full size. So it's matching my text. And it's keeping it on one line, because even if we run out of room, it's just shooting out the side. It's sort of like an image now. You know, images, we always have to do a max width of 100% to stop this behavior from happening. So with this, which I think is like a really, it's an interesting one, but I don't think it's the most useful one in the world, because for like, I always worry about responsiveness. So I always like having intrinsic heights in that the height will grow and shrink, but I want, well, this isn't, I want my width to be a bit more like adjustable. I don't want my width to be based on the content of something, right? I find this one really dangerous, but it could be, I guarantee you there'll be this use case that comes up where you're so happy you know about this. But it is one of those ones that could get you into trouble. Now, the next one is min content. This one's more useful, I think. So min content, as the name implies, try to be as small as possible instead of as big as possible. And in this case, what it means is if you have lots of text, each word will break onto its own line. It's going to shrink down to as small as it can, wherever there's a break possibility. And the width of the parent, or the width of that element, I shouldn't have put parent here, the width of that element is determined by the longest, or the biggest child inside that element. So it's the children are really determining the size of it. So if we go back to this exact same example, and I change this from max to min content, we don't need all this, let's go. It's now being determined by the biggest word, which is the word fancy. And if we go and change this, we add heading back in there, it's now being determined, the width of this element is now being determined by the word heading, because heading is the longest word in that element. And if we did that on our paragraphs, craziness would happen. Width. Actually, I'm going to do a max content on here just to show you that don't do this on your paragraphs. But every paragraph now is being dictated, like it's all being put onto one line. And every paragraph is the length of the content inside of it. We switch this over to min, and every paragraph will have a different width. And it all depends on the longest word. And since I use lorem ipsum, some of these words are kind of long. So here, like example, in this first paragraph here, let's just make this font size bigger. In this first paragraph here, this consecutor is the longest word in that paragraph. So this is determining the width of that element. And then if there's, here we're putting 2 words because it fits. Here, this one, like here, even like this one's all by itself, just because there's not enough room to fit 2 words next to it. But it's just taking the longest word, and this paragraph is, let's put a border on these so we can really see. Border, 2 pixels, solid red. And you can see like every paragraph here has a different width because it's all based on the content of that paragraph. Is auto intrinsic, as Melvin said? I missed Melvin's content, sorry about that. I think, pretty sure auto, technically speaking, is intrinsic, which means that everything sort of is, because block elements, like, it's like a block level element's width by default. I'm 90% sure, we could double check it, but I'm 90% sure that there are, let's check really fast, is auto, but it doesn't, that auto on a block element becomes 100%. So let's just go take a look, actually. This is another thing. The course will be updated after the initial release, and one of the modules that's not going to be available at the first release is going to be about using our dev tools to, like, it's going to be a full-on dive into using dev tools to debug CSS. But that one's going to be on the second launch, but you'll have access to all of that, so don't worry about missing out or anything. But that one might be a while away. So do we have, let's go to computed, display block, we don't even have a width. Computed, can we search? I don't go into the computed very often and I always forget. W. I'm pretty sure it's auto though by default. I don't see anything being listed. But I think auto, technically speaking, is considered intrinsic from a technical perspective, yeah. I see something. Sorry, I'm just going to check the chat here really quickly. Jimmy asked if I could do more live private lessons till the course is available. I'm just worried then I'll run out of content. It would be fun. I am going to be doing a lot more lives, but I don't know. The more lives I do, the less time I have to work on the course. So I don't want to slow down the launch of the course either. It is even, yeah. So we'll see anyway. Seaback saying something about CSS and JS, but I think I missed the original comment on that. Dennis, ever hear about the upcoming book Debugging CSS? I haven't. I'm excited now though. Who's putting that one out? Do you know? And Remco, so min content can be used well for very small devices to make it responsive. We're going to see an example coming up. One thing I like, actually, the interesting thing with min and max, more with min content than max, is this use case right here. I think you can do some interesting things with, say, this title, where it's still a block element. So because it's still a block element, it's not floating, it's not a flex, so like nothing is coming up into this empty space here, and everything falls below. So it's still taking up the whole space, even though its width is stopping at the end of the letter G here. So I do think it opens up these types of possibilities, where I wouldn't necessarily use it for worrying about mobile devices. I use it more as a design possibility. And we're going to see another use case where I think min and max can also be useful. We'll be looking at those really soon. Those will be in my third example. And as Dave says, content is like my paragraphs here. I haven't done anything to them and they're responsive. Like this is responsive. It's, if you haven't done my Conquering Responsive Layout courses, that's like the first thing I say is everything is responsive by default. And then by giving things widths and by doing other stuff and making like this font size it's too big to be on a mobile device. It would have worked fine, but then I decided to make it really big and that would probably cause some overflow or some issues here. So, it is us. So a lot of the time when we do have responsive issues, it's looking at what we did that caused it and why it's not working. Beck was just making a joke. I must have missed the beginning part of it though. So maybe it was the punchline, but I didn't see the joke. I see a few people mentioning Cube. Jimmy and Arianis is asking what Cube is and will it be in the course. Cube's a CSS naming methodology. I did an interview with Andy Bell, who created it. It's on my YouTube channel if you're interested, or just check out Andy Bell's. If you look up Cube, it's cube.fyi. Cube.fyi. It redirects to his site on it. I'm not going to follow it exactly in the course. I don't want to... One thing I don't want to do in the course is say this is how you should be writing your CSS. I think everybody is in different situations. You might be a React developer or working on a team that's React where they're using CSS and JS, or you might be doing your own thing, or you might be using BEM, or you might be using Smacks, or whatever it is. I'm going to be influenced by what Andy does with Cube, because it's a large part of what I want to do in this course is also to embrace the way CSS is meant to work, instead of fighting against it. And Cube is very much in that mindset. But so I'm going to be a lot of what we're going to do will sort of follow that methodology without officially declaring it as Cube. And if you know me, I see a few mentions about BEM now too coming up. BEM is something that's very fond to me. I've been using it a lot. I have videos on why I use it. I'm sort of trending away, but even the BEM and Cube can sort of work together a little bit. I still use the double underscore. I still have like elements within elements and stuff. Yeah, we'll be having some discussion on naming throughout the course. That'll probably be a big topic on a couple of the lives too. Reynard is saying, join late, but explanation so far excellent. You're nailing the whole thing. Thank you so much. This is the first time I ever talk about this. A lot of the time when I'm talking about, if I'm teaching a subject, it's something that I've made demos on and done videos and done YouTube, and then I'm going more in depth. First time I talk about this, so I'm happy that it's going well. Ben is saying that he's not comfortable with BEM. It doesn't seem natural. Hopefully what we're going to cover in this course helps with that. Not making BEM more natural, but making naming conventions a little bit more natural. I don't have a module exactly on it, but we are going to be building a website and we're going to be doing challenges where you have to name stuff in CSS. So it obviously will come up. Okay. Let's see if I remember where I was. So we looked at the min, we looked at max. The last one is fit content. Fit content's probably the most useful one, depending on what you want. Like, I think this just looks fun as a title. I mean, it's my default font. I didn't change my line height, whatever. But like doing something like this could be interesting. I think it would be fine if you're on a website and the blog post and it's a big title. It's like oversized, like this big thing. And it just so happens that like if it's a long word, then the underline goes longer. If it's a short word, then it goes shorter and you have a big empty space. If it's the right style for that type of site, I think it could look kind of good. And I think in certain use cases that could work. Again, we're going to see other use cases for it. It's not just titles like this. It's not a very good, won't be a use case you'll see very often, but I think it can work. But next up we have fit content. And fit content is a hybrid between the two previous ones. And it's a little bit weird in how it works, but if there's enough space, it will act like max content, but it doesn't allow overflowing. So that's my big issue with max content, is it will overflow. In this case, you cannot overflow. So if there's not enough room, it's allowed to shrink until it hits that min content size. It's a lot like how flex items behave, to be honest. If you put, actually, that's not, I wrote that and thinking of it now, not exactly. Maybe I shouldn't have written this last sentence down here. But we'll see. Let's go take a look at what I mean by all this. So I'm going to stick with my heading for now, and then we're going to bring it into some other examples that are a bit more practical. So fit content. So fit content will allow it to be, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Let's go at 1200. So here it's behaving like max content, where it was stopping at the like its width is based on the content that's inside of it. So if my content is shorter, the total width of it will shrink to match my content. Or if it's longer, it grows to fit my content inside of it. So that's exactly how max content was working, but we had that problem where max content would overflow out the side. What it's going to do here is it's going to allow it to break. So, oh, I don't have enough room. I'm allowed to keep shrinking. And it's going to keep shrinking and keep shrinking and keep shrinking until it gets to this. And obviously there, now I have some overflow because, you know, the word is just too long. So at that stage, it just stops shrinking. But it's a little bit of a hybrid between the two. It's sort of the same as having this, like, if not even declaring a width. So if I don't have a width on something, when I get to this point, it's going to overflow as well because an element always has that minimum size based on the biggest child inside of it. So this word heading is the biggest, that's not really a child, it's a piece of content, which is why I wasn't using the word child inside, because this paragraph is my child. But this word heading is sort of setting a minimum size by itself. The difference is if I grow, that heading will keep growing, and it's growing all the way out to here. Whereas if I put fit content on it, it stops it. It's not allowed to grow bigger than the content that's inside of it. If I switch this to auto, auto will go back to 100%. Auto is the default. So auto is the same as having, not 100%. But yeah, auto is the same as just not having anything on here at all. They're going to behave exactly the same way. Yanis is asking if I finished the lesson part. It's taking me longer than expected. Now we're going to get through in the next 15 minutes. I just want to look at some practical use cases of these, and then I'll jump into the question and answers. Tim's just asking for a quick recap. I'll run through in a second, sure thing. He came in a little bit late. And yeah, the stream will be available to rewatch later. Yanis is asking if auto will center. That's if the margin left and right are centered. So that's dealing with margin auto, which is a little bit different. And actually, I just recorded yesterday a video on using margin auto in ways that people never do. So I'm really looking forward to that one. That'll be on YouTube 2 weeks from now, probably. I think, or maybe that's next week's. That's next week's video, so you can look forward to that one. Can fit content be used on images? I don't know. Can it? I mean, I guess you could, but it would fit content actually in. I don't think. Yeah, I mean it can, but I'm gonna hold off for one. I'm trying to think. The reason you wouldn't need it on an image, and we're gonna try it in a second. I don't see why it wouldn't work. But okay, actually, let's just put it, and I'll talk my way through as I do it. On splash it 400, 500. So we should get our image loading in. There we go. So if I say image width is fit content, what will happen? So it should look exactly the same, and will it shrink? No, it won't. Oh, you know why it won't? Because it's a little bit like with a heading. This is the biggest word. My content, like this heading, can't be smaller than this word. My image now can't be smaller than the image that's inside of it. So that's why that won't work. But that's why usually on images, it's a display block, which isn't always needed, but I usually do it. And then a max width 100%. I mean, that sort of gives us the exact same behavior, right? So it's shrinking and growing with it. The reason this works on an image and you can't do that on the paragraph is because, or in the heading or paragraphs or a block element, again, images are replaced elements, so they're kind of weird, but like even if this is display block, it's not getting a width of 100%, or if it is, like the image inside of it isn't growing, right? It's staying this size or it will shrink, it won't grow. Whereas a block element, a traditional block element, like a heading, a paragraph, they are 100%. So setting a max width 100% won't change anything on that. This is, by doing this on our images, we're trying to get them to behave like my other elements are behaving almost. Dave, it looks like when the content doesn't fit anymore, the width goes back to 100. The red after the element stretches all the way across. Oh, yeah. Oh, let's go check that out for a second. It probably is doing that. I wasn't paying attention. Width. Let's just see. So here it's, yeah, okay. So that's a good point, Dave. It was Dave, right? Yeah. So Dave here noticed that if we're here, it's matching my content. Here, it's stopping at the minimum, so it has to be the width of the word heading. It won't go smaller. But here, you'll notice that it's actually longer than this word. I think the reason for that is, like, technically, if this word wasn't this long, it would be squeezing up into this space. But because there's not enough room, it's putting in a word break. If I did, I forget what the term is. This is where I wish I had my auto word break. MDM word break. I did this in my last live stream too, didn't I? Break all. I think this is the one, break all. If we don't have an, there, like, see here, like, technically speaking, that H1 is, like, the width of it stopping here. It's just like, obviously we don't want heading coming over here. So it's keeping that space available if it had something that could squeeze in there. But because the word heading is too long, it's falling down to here. So yeah, you do fall into this realm where you might look like it's bigger, but it's just because that space is technically available for something to get into if it could. Chetan's asking, with my image, is it maintaining aspect ratio? Is there a way to set aspect ratio such as image resizes? 16:9 goes to 4:3. Look into what Lisa was mentioning with object fit. I'm not going to dive into it in this one just because it's a little bit off topic. But object fit could help you out on that one. A little bit, at least. There'd be some work to be done there to change the actual aspect ratio of it, but when you change it, it would normally squish. If you use what Lisa mentioned with the object fit cover, then it should be able to at least not stretch the image. Yeah, let's add a border. Fancy title, border, 2 pixels, solid blue. So you can see, like, it's that whole size here, even though, like, this is empty, but it's because it's looking for a word to, like, that heading word. It can't fit anymore because it's too long, so it goes to the next line. But if I took off my G, it would fit there. So the content itself, like, this H1 has to be that big, even though the text isn't there. And that's where the break all sort of shows us that, yes, it would normally be doing it as long as things can fit. So you can see, like, it's keeping that space available now for it. But hopefully that makes sense on why it's behaving the way it does. Thank you for the suggestion of the border, Peter. So just, I'll use I'm trying to think. I'm just going to jump in to this example that I got ready. This one's like a basic layout example on where something like this could be useful. And where, like, say on my body here, and I'm not saying this is a really, really basic example. We're going to look at a bit more of a complex one with this, but we're going to start with this one for a really basic example. And I don't know if this would work with Flex. We could try it with Flex too after. But if I did something like this and I did a display of grid, because you see these examples all the time, and then I did a grid template, or I don't need, yeah, grid template rows, 1FR, 1FR. I'm going to do one more thing. That's not going to change. It got a little bigger, but my body has a min height of 100 VH as well. So I can make this layout fit that whole space. If you're not familiar with grid, the FR is just saying, like, I have 3 rows, each one is an equal size. So it's distributing them all equally. Generally speaking, you wouldn't want to do this. You'd want this top one to be whatever we almost want this to go back to the default behavior that elements have. And what I don't want also is to have, like, if I did, I don't even know. I don't use auto with grid template rows very often, actually. Looks very, very similar. So it's trying to fill up all the available space. And the way grid is a little bit like flex in that the elements will try and stretch to fit their parent. And because my minimum height is 100 VH, they're stretching to fit that space. And this is a problem that people run into is when, let's just say my main content here, P times 100 with some lorem, so we have tons of content. And let's turn off all of this. Or actually, in this case, it's now working, where you get these sites like this that look fine. You have your normal site, everything's working fine, your title's at the top, your footer's all the way down at the bottom, and you have all your content in the middle, and there's no issue whatsoever. But the problem that comes up is then you end up on a site, or you make a page that has little content, and your footer comes all the way and it gets stuck over here, because there's no content to push it down. And we saw then that, like, I could come in and make my auto, but that doesn't do anything because I need it to have a minimum height, and then everything stretches. So this is where I could say that I could have a min content on the top, and I could have a min content here on the bottom. And this is setting the height. Because it's rows, it's setting heights. So the height of this one is min content. The only reason we have space there is I do have some padding. If I took the padding out, well, there's the padding and there's the default margin on the text. So the title area is defining its own height. It's acting minimum height. Here it's acting minimum height. And then this is stretching to fill the available space. But then again, if I came in and I add in all those paragraphs, because that middle area is set, it's going to behave like you'd expect it to. And this just comes all the way down to the bottom there. So that could be one useful case for a min, setting up something using min content. Michael's asking if I could use Michael's asking if we can use 0.5 or 0.25 for an FR. You can, yeah. You can use any number you want, and it's all fractions. So like, but FRs are a bit weird because they're not exactly the amount of space, period. It's the amount of available space after the min content is taken up by each one. So like if I had each one of these at a min content, like this is my available space left over. So when I put each one to 1 FR, it's going to distribute this empty space equally between the three. So technically my site title would be a little bit bigger than the other two, I believe. Another question about if this could use 1 FR, it would, because that was the original way I did this before I... so if this was min content, I should have done both of those at the same time. Min content, and this was 1 FR, that would also work, yeah. And it would look exactly the same. Could we put max content? You could put max height, max content on the middle element without grid. Main, max content, height, I don't think content, let's see. And body, min height, 100 VH. I don't think it's going to work. Because it's still, the max height is still looking at the content, like the max content is still focusing on the content that's inside of it. So I think that's why it didn't work, Mel. And an interesting FR, I think, doesn't even stand for fraction. Or maybe that, I think it becomes like it's a flexible element or something like that. I remember reading it and going like, it's FR. I was sure, maybe it is fraction. I'm mixing myself up at this point. But it becomes a flexible element, which, yeah, fraction of remaining, F fraction remaining. I guess that would make sense. Chitan is asking, how can I have a separator handle between these div to drag them and adjust the height? Is it possible with just CSS? No, that would not be possible with CSS, as far as I know. That would, you'd need some JavaScript definitely in there. So there we go. There's one example. My next one's also gonna, but I mean this, well, let's just say I did this as display flex. And then here we do the same idea, but flex direction is column. I always have to think about which one I want. So they're going like that. And then if my main had a... Oh, it's not working the way I thought it would. No, this isn't what I thought it would do. I don't think it's going to work. No, it didn't. Darn. I was sort of hoping we could get it with flex as well. Or what if we did justify content stretch? This would work just with a flex grow. Flex grow of 1, I think would, yeah. So it's a little bit outside the scope of what we're worrying about right now, and I don't want to dive too deep into that rabbit hole. So I'll leave it on the original example because I'm going to have this saved for you guys to reference later on if you want to come back to it. A sidebar navigation with overflow scroll, would that work? Not sure exactly what you mean, Peter. What about a sidebar with, if the overflow is scroll? If we set the height to max content and it had a lot of height, it would fit that content. So I don't think you'd end up with an overflow is the problem. Yeah. Okay, last one that we're going to come to here is this example where I've set up a card. And again, I'm using grid just because I find I use the min and max content the most with grid. I think it actually started with grid, but I could be wrong. Where here I've set up 2 columns instead of 3. So I have an FR, 1FR, 1FR, and actually I have a whole article, I forget where I published it, where I made this. It might be on Dev2, no, it's on Free Code Camp. I could find, I'll put the link when I share the video maybe. But I made this card for Free Code Camp. I made some changes to it for this example though. So we have this card here, and I'm not going to worry about here, but here where we get these 2 columns, I just made 2 columns this way. And in the original one, I did something like this just to set it up to work. But what I wanted to show you is something that's a little bit more dynamic that you could set this up with. And there is a whole module of the course, or a whole section of the course where I'm going to be, or actually it's a whole week of the course, where I'm going to be talking about content versus layout. And this is crossing that threshold a little bit. Whereas sometimes, most of the time I like controlling my layout and then inserting elements inside of it. So that's one of the reasons I really like grid. I set up my grid and then I place my elements inside of it and it goes where I want it to go. But what could be interesting here is I've set my image up to be 160 pixels. So this image that's right here is 160 pixels. I think I even declared it in my CSS. Oh, it has a minimum of 7 rem. So it could, like, that's actually, I think that's why here it's bigger and then here it gets smaller. So it wants to be 160 pixels, but here it's a little bit smaller than 160 pixels. So what we could do is the same idea here, where in this grid template column, so I'm looking at this side right here, I have 2 choices. And actually that's not updating because that's not 1FR, 1FR. There we go. So I have my 2 columns. And what I could do is on this first one that has the image, I could set this as either a max content or a min content. And this is another place where I think this is where it's a bit more interesting. And it's a little bit like here, we can do a big scale thing. It's also really interesting in smaller layouts where there's multiple elements involved. Because on this one and on this one, I was setting it on 1 element. This element needs to be as big as it can or as small as it can type of thing. Especially this one where we're just controlling our heading. But when you get into layout, where it gets more interesting is this area, which is my, well, this column. So the left column that I have here, this whole left column, I can control that. There's 3 different pieces of content. I have an image, I have some text, and I have an unordered list over here. And because there's 3 pieces of content, there's 3 different things living in there that each have their own size. And that means I could rely on one of those to be setting the overall size of my element. And so to show you what I mean is if I came on this one and I set this to min content, that's going to shrink down. And it's trying to get as small as possible. And now it's actually this graphic designer that's controlling the size of this. Now, it's not always the best option for this, because say I had 10 different people and they all had different positions, you could run into the trouble of, actually, maybe it's the image. I'm going to make this text a little smaller. I want the image font size 4 rem, 0.875 rem. Okay, so it is my image that is dictating the size here. So even 0.5 will make it really tiny. So my image is dictating the size of this column here. And as long as I always had my images in there, that could always be the one dictating it. So I don't actually have to like explicitly say this is 700 pixels or 600 pixels or something like that. And then of course I could do the opposite where it's max content, and then it will switch to it's actually the name, or maybe it's my list. My name's really small now. Let's just take this line off. But now, there we go. My name is now the one dictating the size of it. So because the position is long, this is taking up more room, and CEO, and it's actually going to take up even more room now. So there's a downside to this because it could lead to inconsistency within a layout. But I think it shows sort of the power of something you could do with this, especially in one-offs. But there's certain times where I think having this type of power where you know it's not going to break a line of text could be really useful for your layout. And in this case, actually, because it's in a media query, it's not breaking my layout anywhere. And it's sort of dictating how this card should look. And again, I could do a fit content, but it's going to be a little bit different with the fit content because it's going to sort of behave, because this is trying to, the right side column is trying to take up as much room as possible. It's the fit content in this case is pretty much acting the same as a min content, where, you know, it's not going to grow or shrink. And it's the image that's dictating how big this column is once again. How do you decide 7 rem for the image? I was just making this quickly, so I decided it should be 7 rem. The image is 160, so I had it at 10 rem, and then I wanted it a bit smaller, so I made it 7. That's about items in the nav. Yeah. I'm going to mention it. I mean, this lesson will be available to rewatch. So technically this is a lesson for the course, and it's something that I'll sort of bring up in situations where it applies for the layout that we're building. So it might come up in a couple of spots, but I'm not going to be having like a real deep dive, but there is somewhere specific in, I really made the layout that we're building specific as I built it with different lessons in mind. So there is one thing where we're going to use this in the layout that we're building. The link I could throw it in the chat for now, but I'm going to send out an email tomorrow with the link to the replay, and I'll include the link to all the Codepens as well. But I'll put all 3 of them in the chat just in case. I should have done that, I guess, before. That one might be, some of these are saved as private, so you might not be able to fork them right now. I don't know if you can fork a private Codepen or not. And I said that would take 45 minutes, and it took a little bit longer than planned. But that's all I had planned for this lesson. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'd like to know if if there's any questions specific about what we were talking about, the intrinsic and extrinsic. And while I wait for those questions to come in, since the chat's a little behind where I am, I'll just do a quick recap. So we have the extrinsic sizing, which is, it's when the width is not determined by the content. So if you say width is 600 pixels in your CSS, you're saying what the width should be. It doesn't matter what's inside of it. It just matters that you told it the width. That's extrinsic sizing. It's the same as you're explicitly declaring something. So that's extrinsic sizing. So default widths of an element, or the size that you give it. Then we have intrinsic sizing, which is determined by the content. And the most obvious example is inline elements. The other examples we quickly looked at were position absolute and fixed. Whereas as soon as you do position fixed, it shrinks to match the width of the content. And your flex items, as I said, I don't know if a flex item's considered intrinsic. I guess it would be. I think it would be, but there's so many different things you can do with flex items to not make them anymore. Like when I did the flex grow before, so they're just sort of are. And then we looked that we have a min content, a max content, and a fit content. And we've seen that we can apply them in a whole bunch of different ways. I do think that in the most part, min content or fit content are probably the ones you'll want to use most often. But there are probably times where max content could come into play as well. And I'm not done with, I'm done with this, but I do have people sent in questions ahead of time. So I'm going to be spending some time answering those questions, but I'll also take any questions people have. The questions that people sent in aren't necessarily on this exact topic. So if, as I'm going through them, I'm also going to be reading the chat. So we'll go through some questions that are a bit more off topic. I do see Simon asking about Tailwind. I agree with Seebeck. I think it's amazing for rapid prototyping. I think it's a better option from what I've seen than something like Bootstrap. I know a lot of devs who are in love with it. I think it's a little bit the same as with Bootstrap in that it rose to popularity because lots of people don't like writing CSS. And if you don't like writing CSS, it solves a lot of your problems for you. So in that sense, I think that, and for rapid prototyping, I think it's fantastic because you just throw something together and it tends to look pretty good. So I think for that, it's really awesome. Seebeck also mentioned Bootstrap. And this is like definitely my opinion on it. I've seen some really nice sites built with it. I know a lot of people think it's amazing. So, but I'm very, I have a YouTube channel that I've been doing for 4 years that's focused on writing custom CSS. So I think I am biased a little bit on it. Can intrinsic sizing be used in background positioning? I don't think so. I'm going to guess no, but width, height can accept min and fit content. It's pretty much your width, your height, anything that would affect the width or height of something. So that's why on my grid it's working, because I'm using it to set the width and height of elements. Actually, an interesting place for max content could be on a min max, I think. Yeah, you could probably come up with a fun use case with min max and using it on like the max is a fit content and the minimum or a max content and the minimum is something else. That could be interesting if you had like a whole bunch of images that were different sizes maybe, because then the grid cells might be defined, like the width of each grid item could potentially be different, which I think I never thought of that until now. So I'm not going to, I think it might fail miserably. So, but if you want to try that out, I'd recommend it. Browser support. Peter's asking about browser support. Good question. It's really good. Where's my, let's go to here. Can I use even fit content? I think is the new, like the least, but I think they're all the same now. It's pretty much not Internet Explorer, which these days, I did make sure to check that before I made this lesson because I didn't want to go in deep on something that had like 40% browser support. Mel, intrinsic is anything decided by the browser, not the designer? Yeah. That's one way to think about it. But inline elements are definitely intrinsic because the content of. Oh, sorry. Yeah, intrinsic is anything decided by the browser, not the designer. But it's. I mean, this is really coming from the spec. If we go and look at the official description, just because like display block, they're not, the width of a block element isn't intrinsic, which is really important because if we look at my quote from the spec. It's intrinsic. Intrinsic sizing is, it has to be based on the content of what's inside of it, whereas block level elements aren't decided by their content that's inside of it. They're just full width by default, right? So I'm pretty sure that doesn't fall, like it doesn't matter what context it's in, it's just going big. Even if there's no content inside of it, it's going to go full width. So I do think there's a little bit of a difference. Create your own yeah. All right, so I am going to jump into the other, whoops, that's where I wanted to be. So I did have some other questions that had come up. So these are just from the survey I did, but I'll keep an eye on the chat. And if you did ask any of these questions, I might have modified it a little bit. I might have dropped part of the question just if it was really too far out of scope, even though some of these are a little bit out of scope. And I might have dropped your question if it was super similar to somebody else's question. So just so you know and have a heads up on that. The Maggers, did you say Flex and Grid are covered in this course? Or actually, I'll do a little bit of a Q&A on the course because I know a lot of people are interested. I'm going to be using them. I'm going to be explaining why and how they're working and why I'm doing what I'm doing, but I'm not going to do a deep dive into how Flexbox works or how Grid works. And we're actually, yeah, I have 2 parts where I'm using Grid. So I'll explain exactly why it's working, how it's working in that context of what I'm using it in. But I'm not going to do a deep dive in that just because I think a full course on Grid would be longer than this course is going to be. Is there a fallback or polyfill for IE11 using SAS? Using SAS, I don't know. There might... let's just check. What's it called? Post CSS fit content. My guess would be that if it's anywhere, it would be post CSS. That's usually add intrinsic. There you go. So if you use post CSS in your build, then you could add. It looks like they have a fix for that. I wonder how that works. I'm curious. Yeah, as Seebeck is mentioning, there's the link in the description below if anybody wants to hop into the Discord community. You're all welcome. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'll be setting up a private area in there just for this course. It's set up, I just need to add people. So Seebeck has been kind enough to offer to manually add people, so you can DM him if you want to get the role to get added, but there's no specific content in there. But if you're talking about anything CSS, HTML, JavaScript related, it's relatively active community, so you can jump in there and ask questions about anything. Dennis is asking about images as flex items and applying a flex grow, flex shrink. You do have to be really careful because Firefox and Chrome do things differently there. I'm pretty sure by default, an image in Firefox will not shrink below its, it sort of has a min width on it or whatever. It tends to behave like you almost want it to, whereas in Chrome it will shrink to 0. Or maybe I'm thinking of Grid. I just know that in Chrome there's this, if you set things up in a certain way, if you put an image in I'll do it. It's the most frustrating thing. Like here, if I take all this content out, take this out, and I'll take this out. So if I just have my image and I just have text on this side, and I set this to 1FR, 1FR, and of course if my image, where's my image? Oh, not 1FR, 1FR, that's not right. But profile image, if I don't have a minimum width on that image, sorry if I'm jumping around a little bit. Let's just set this one up to auto maybe. Like my image disappears, which is extremely annoying that happens. And I don't think the same thing happens in Firefox. I think Firefox will actually maintain its normal size. There's definitely some issue, there's a different way that they handle, the 2 browsers handle that. And I don't know what Safari does. Just because put minimum sizes on your images if they're grid items. If you think they're going to be alone inside of an element, and there's going to, if it's just that image inside a grid cell, be really careful. Gustavo's asking, are you covering proportions like the H size of an H1, margin size, and size of elements related to that H1? Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, more of like the a scale. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I do it because we already didn't build the layout, and I'm going to take a certain approach for that. I'm not going to dive too deep into the UX side of things on the scale, but there's some people that, like, I did print design for years, and there's two types of print designers. There's print designers who live by the grid and everything needs to be on a baseline grid, and there's those of us who don't. I don't. I like just eyeballing things a little bit. But there are, I eyeball, but there are some rules I follow. So I could mention some spacing and stuff. I'm trying to think if I am going to be trying to add more YouTube content on design. I don't know a lot of good design resources just because I did design for so long. Like, I was never looking to learn a lot online. I went to school for it. So if anybody else has any suggestions, though, you can drop them in the chat. Oh, Ben's saying that he has read-only permissions in the Discord. Yeah, if you do join the Discord, you'll have to go to the welcome channel. And in the welcome channel, there's a big thing about the rules and just welcoming you to the channel and how everything works. And at the very bottom, there's a whole bunch of emoji. Well, not emojis, but sort of. But you can pick a role. So, I could open the Discord. Where is it? So if you do decide to join, it's this one right here, and in the welcome channel, you just want to, like, there's the rules and how everything works, how to format code so people can read the code easily. And then this one here, don't click the flags. I don't think they'll do anything. You can if you want, if you want to say where you're from. But you'll want to choose from the roles down here. And when you pick one of those roles, it's going to give you access to the other channels. So you can come and hang out and chat with us. Smith is asking for a course outline. I wish I had two screens right now, but 1 second. Let me just pull that off for a sec. I have a really rough one I could share. That's not the right one. Oh no, that's not the right file. But actually, I'd have to dig for a second to find it. But basically, it's 3 weeks. The first week is a lot about the fundamentals you've already learned about, but not in enough detail. I'm going to dive really big into the cascade in hopefully ways that you haven't done before and haven't thought about. We learn about the cascade early on, and then we sort of abandon learning about it because we think it's nice and easy. And then that's where we run into the issues. A lot of the problems and issues people have with CSS. And when I say the cascade, I don't mean like this property goes before this property. We're going to dive into a lot more with that and specificity and a few other things. And that goes a little bit into the class naming as well, that we're going to dive into. That's going to be a part of it. We're going to go, another week is looking at formatting contexts. So we're going to be looking at block level, or like the default formatting contexts, what happens, what is a formatting context, what it means, and then also the impact that grid and flex do have, because they have their own unique formatting context. And I want to look at them in a way that's going to potentially change how you write your CSS a little bit. And all of the reason I want to do both of those is it's going to change. The idea is to look at CSS in a bit of a different way, which will lead us to the third week, which the purpose of the third week is separating our content from our layouts a little bit, and understanding how formatting context works has a big influence on that. And then wrapping, the whole idea is that you can start writing CSS and understanding parts of CSS that you might not have heard about. Or again, the first week is all about diving deeper into subjects that you've heard about, but you didn't really probably learn, because I don't see them addressed anywhere near enough. So the first week is diving deeper into things you know about. The second week is diving into things you might not have heard about. We'll do stacking context too. Stacking context is something people usually know of, but it's kind of frustrating. It's just, stacking context is super frustrating sometimes, so that can solve a lot of people's problems. And there's some other stuff too that I'm probably forgetting. I'm just trying to see here in the chat. Yes, I'm going to switch to the other questions now. So let me find them. Okay, and let me share them with you because it's going to be boring just to stare at my face the whole time. That's this one. Yeah, okay. So again, I tried to group them by person, but there's a few that are mixed up and a few that I've gotten rid of. So this person said the biggest issue they have is about how to start the layout of a web page, and you have a particular workflow, and this also leads into starting with a CSS framework. We talked about that. And I don't know if you can talk about CSS architecture like BEM, which is the best option, or how to integrate aspects of it. So I chose this question on purpose as the first one. We talked a little bit about the BEM cube and all of that. So I do think that I don't think there's a best one. I think that's one thing that's really, really important is I really don't think there's a best one. I think the best one is one that if you're working in a team that everyone agrees on and agrees to use. Because if you're working on a team of people and there's disagreement and somebody decides to go rogue, don't do that. If you're like, BEM's the best and everyone else is doing their own thing, and then, or if everyone's just doing their own thing, that's the worst. So the best is everybody agreeing on one. If you're just doing your own projects, then it's doing what you're comfortable with. And again, this course is going to get a bit into the ideas of Cube, because I do think that there's a lot of value in what Andy's put together with it. The ideas that he has, and how it's one of the reasons I'm going to go into the cascade a lot, is because that plays into how I name things and organize a lot of my CSS nowadays. And when it comes to the layout too, and I think the next one is also about layout. Here we go. Layouts in general and how to think about layouts granularly. I can't speak. But what properties should we focus on thinking about layout? Again, I put this in just because there will be a big part of this course talking specifically about layout. I know people have a lot of trouble breaking down layouts. Part of it is experience that you just get through making stuff. But I'm really going to try in the part where we do the layout versus content. And the layout versus content part of the course is going to be a lot of recap on what we've already done, and maybe refactoring some code along the way, because by that point we'll have built out a large part of our layout for the big project we're working on. But if you can separate layout from content, I think it's very useful to be able to do. And so, yeah, we'll be getting into that. What properties should we focus on? I think this is an easier thing to teach when we're building a layout, so it's hard for me just to sort of talk and say this is what you should do. And it's definitely hard to think about it when you don't have experience, because you might have heard me say it before, but one of my favorite things is looking at a layout, because it's, you start, whenever you see a layout and you start just like, you're breaking it down, just visually looking at it, and I'm saying, okay, I need to do that. Here I could use grid or maybe flexbox, but that's because I have the experience and I know what works and what doesn't, because I've built a lot of stuff. And I think that's where experience, and if you're not experienced with it, it's frustrating because then things don't work. So that I will try and break down my thought process as much as possible when I'm doing it, to explain how I got to where, like, why am I choosing this option? I'm not just, one thing that drives me nuts with courses is when it's like, okay, and here I'm using display grid and I'm going to do 1FR min content, 4FR, and then they just keep going. And it's like, okay, that worked in this one specific use case, but why did you set that up? And I hate seeing that. People always, not always, but I get on a lot of my YouTube videos, I get comments, people saying they're too long. And it's because I could do that. I could just run through and write the code and make the thing work. But I think it's so much more important to explain why I'm making my decisions. So that will definitely be a big part of this course. So I'm just going to jump in the chat really quickly. Jeff mentioned, when I finish a website, it ends up with multiple CSS files because I probably don't know enough. Do not know enough. It's difficult to maintain. Sass is good for that. Definitely. I saw someone else mention doing it in Sass, and you can import everything together. That's not my Sass. No, I might have had the project open, but SAS can help with things like that for sure. As long as you organize it properly. When I first started using SAS and I had all my imports going, it didn't help with maintaining things because it was so mixed up. Yeah, and actually, someone showed me recently. I'll show you. I'm gonna make. I was gonna add this to a video. I think this came up in the Discord. Was it? It came up somewhere. This was cool. I haven't tried it yet. I didn't know this, that you could do this in VS Code. I'm pretty sure this came up in the Discord. If you put a comment, you start it with a hashtag section 1. Is this going to work? I don't know if this is going to work. And then here I do another one. Is it double hashtag? I don't know. Section 2. This isn't working, so maybe I'm wrong. It was something with using hashtags in your comments. I'm going to have to look it up. I just saw it and I said it's really cool and I wanted to look at it more, but there was a way you could, like, if you do your code folding, that you could fold, like, maybe it's only in SAS, I don't know, but you could fold like whole sections away instead of just doing individual selectors. Maybe someone knows in the comments. But even if you're just in your CSS and you do a comment, and then you'll see this a lot in frameworks, but you could make a table of contents, 1 general, and then 2 typography, 3 whatever, and you set it all up, and then here you come in and you say this is my 2 typography. And then you could even look here at your, you go all the way to the top of your file, you find the one you want, and then you just do a Command F and you type it in, 2.typography, and it brings you right there. I did that for the longest time until I started using SAS more. Oh, without the space. So here, and then I do section 1? Or does that all have to be? Do I just not have like a cool version? Do I have to save my file? I don't know. I'm doing something wrong. That's okay. Okay, I'll go on to the next question. An efficient way of testing CSS, ways to identify bad code and useless properties. But then they change that a little bit here. I think this is sort of 2 different questions. Because then, for example, when you write some code and it's overwritten for properties, is there any way to, or tool available or method? I mean, if you're overriding things, you might have to override things, right? Like that's normal to override existing styles because you need it to be more specific or different somewhere else. So if unless it's overridden everywhere, like you have H1 color red and then lower in your code you have H1 color blue, then it's kind of useless. There are tools you can use that can strip away any CSS that's not used in your project. There's one that I mention this in every single live stream I do, and I don't have the tool, so I forget what it is. But if anyone knows that, there are ways. Do you have to write region? Name region. Sorry, I got distracted by the chat again. But there are tools that you can use. So if anybody in the chat knows of the ones that delete unused CSS, let me know and I'll mention it. And then a little bit of a similar question, I think, because this is talking about overriding. So if like you're overriding things a lot, how do you simplify my CSS after getting the right effect, but your code is bad? You work at it. I don't know how else to say it. You look at it and you try and simplify it. I do this for my demos all the time. Like if you look at one of the YouTube videos, I'll open up Codepen again and I'll go to my dashboard. My dashboard is just, or this is on my search for card because I was looking for that card I was going to use. But like this is just full of demos that aren't finished. Right? Like the wave animation that just went up, that's here. This is what my next, like I always start in Codepen, I throw things together and my code is really messy. Here's first draft, fourth draft, like here, fourth draft on that one. This is the one I did for Brad's channel. Like I got up to a 5th and final draft. This is a draft. This isn't the final code that went up. And if you come and look at my code that's in here, compared to the final code that I did. Like this, I don't know if we're going to see it, but like my naming was different. This one's probably not that bad, actually. It gets a little messy. It's not as bad as I thought, but definitely, like, I have lots of examples where it's really messy. Like things are not organized. Because you're just trying to get something done, and I do think if it works, the user doesn't know if your CSS isn't great if it's working. It's not like JavaScript where if you improve your JavaScript on something, it could have huge performance gains. CSS can lead to performance gains, but in general, unless you do something really wild with your CSS, like you're animating everything and going crazy with it, you won't have huge performance hits. So messy CSS, it's harder to maintain, but it doesn't mean that it's bad if it works, if that makes sense. But a large part of it is just like, okay, let's look at, like, I don't know if I go to my fourth draft on this, if it'll look any worse. I mean, the project looks sort of the same, but I don't know why this is the fourth draft. Or even, I mean, you see here, like I was commenting things out. I think part of that is you're bringing things in, like my naming on stuff is probably worse. I changed, like I was calling everything shoe at one point, and then I had to change that because I was even up here had like a shoe class on my hero. Is that going to be like here? My hero area was called shoe because I'd started off by doing this part first, and then I was reusing that class in other places. And then so I had to do a really big refactor on this code because my naming convention was terrible. So I started by changing the name on everything here. And then I said, well, I don't need the bleed section anymore because I've changed my whole thing here. So it was like, okay, this doesn't make sense to be here because it should be here. And then you're moving stuff around. It takes time to do it. I wish there was a better answer on like really refactoring well, but it's just moving things around and deleting the code you're not using sometimes. Purge CSS, that's the one. So purge CSS will, if you have a giant CSS file that has a million unused selectors, it will delete the stuff from there. So you can look into that. I'm gonna try, oh, you need to do end regions? Let's try this. I'm really getting distracted by this regioning thing. I'm like the least power user when it comes to VS Code in the world. Oh, there we go. So here I can, like from here, so let's just call this general. And then here I'll call it end general. Is that going to work too? Or does it have to be region? It has to be region. There, like I can collapse that whole area from here, like all of this, I can get to collapse there. So if you make a whole bunch of regions, I'm guessing here I could make my name maybe, region 1. Is that still working? That's still working. Okay, and then I have my region 1. So you could do like general, typography, and have all your different sections in your CSS. And when you're not in one of them, you just collapse that whole region down. Really cool. Yeah. Yes, DevTools can help. I think that does come up into this where you're overwriting things. Like, and I do Firefox, well, whatever, they both do it. Like if I come into here and I come and look, as I said, like I screwed up a lot in this area. So like this is my shoe bleed, but it's because I had, like, look at all this stuff I'm overwriting. Like this is what I'd originally set up, and then I'm like, oh, I had to change my margin, I had to change my padding, my border radius, my text align. Like I was changing a lot of stuff in there because I was building it on top of that other one, and then I had to modify it a lot. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It really depends on the context of the situation, and I don't want to say you shouldn't have any overwrites, because the only time you won't have overwrites is if you're using something probably like Tailwind, or if you really have tons of utility classes. And even utility classes can cause overwrites too. So, I mean, I don't want to dive too deep into that. I think if you have overwrite over overwrite over overwrite, maybe there's a better approach that you could take. But I do think it's a slippery slope, and you don't want to waste too much time on it either. And I think it's one of those things that you get better at. We will be talking about using utility classes quite a bit. It's something that I didn't do for a long time that I've started doing. So that will be part of it. And sort of when should I use a utility class versus when should I use component like a normal class. And by utility class is just like a class that does one thing, right? Like it sets a margin. You see it in like margin left 4, right? Like that it's setting it's setting a margin on the left of 4 units, and the units is whatever you want them to be. But you know, that a utility class does one thing and only one thing generally. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that too in the course. Bye, Seebeck. Thanks for hanging out for this long. Enjoy your lunch. Next question. Let's keep going trucking. There's a mention, I just left the Z-index thing here to remind me to talk about stacking context. So I will be talking about that. There's a whole section of the course. This also leads into, this was a few questions I took out. The parts in brackets were to remind me of the rest of the question, because they went into detail on what each point meant. So generic or specific styling. But they specifically mentioned, like, I'm very specific in my videos. And they did ask, is that because I'm doing one-offs? And that's mostly what it is. It's hard to do very generic styling when you're doing a video that looks at one thing. But as I said, I'm going to be looking at utility classes, and we're going to be looking at having a lot of generic CSS. And then you start with the generic and then build into word-specific styling when required. No more influence of desired styling on HTML. Oh, so they just said with things like Flexbox and with Grid, it seemed like we used to have to write HTML in a really specific way with the layout coming to mind. Whereas these days, it seems to be less so. And I think they just want, like, do I think that, and especially with Grid. Flexbox, you still sort of got to think about it a little bit. I find with Grid, you can really, and actually that's that last card that we did, this one, my article on Free Code Camp that goes into this, it's literally about that and how, like, if you look at, I have a div class card and then I have image, UL, H2, and my H2 should probably be at the top, but I just have, like, that's it, right? Like, there's not a lot going on in here. There's no, I'm not worried about wrapping something to place that thing. I don't need a column here and a column over here. I just need to put the content that's inside of it, and then I'm relying on Grid to set the layout. So we sort of break away from the div soup mentality that we used to have, which is fantastic. I do think if we can simplify our markup, that's good. But if you need divs, use divs. Like, you know, if we're using Flexbox, you probably need to wrap stuff around, which is important. Advantages of browser variables above SCSS variables. We're going to be using CSS custom properties in the project. I think there's big advantages in terms of customizing of JavaScript interaction with them. JavaScript and custom properties play really well together. And also that you can redefine custom properties inside of media queries, for me, is probably, that's all I need to convince me that they're better. I also just prefer, if something's native to CSS, I'd probably prefer to use it. I guess the only advantage of Sass's variables is that they're like, it renders out as regular CSS, but you know, you're not worried about browser compatibility. So yeah, I mean, we have post CSS and all that though. Flat or nested selectors, when to use which, definitely one of the reasons I'll be talking about the cascade. And I'm I still lean heavily towards flat, but I'm getting into nested selectors once again. We'll be talking about that more. And VS Code extension for combining and minifying JavaScript files, I don't know. I have a gulp build that does it. I've used Prepros that does it. I don't know of any VS Code extensions, but maybe if you come in the community, you can find out from there. Gustavo is saying you could apply utility classes in components. 100%, 100%. It's just, I find there's a fine line between, like, I don't like it when you need 37 utility classes to style something. I find it sort of defeats the purpose at that point. I think utility classes are nice for getting things, like setting things that you're setting on a whole bunch of different components. When I need like a margin bottom component or utility class and I'm like, with 8 units and it's the only place I'm using it, I don't know, or padding and stuff like that. Like there's a fine line and a balance between the two, I think. I have a tough time dealing with what is right in terms of selection of right grid system, Grid or Flexbox. This is something that a lot of people struggle with. So yeah, as I mentioned, I'm going to be really going into my thought process of why I'm picking what when we're building out the layouts. So that will be part of it, I guess. I do think that, yeah, good. Sorry, I'll finish this question first. But I do think that, you know, people go with what they're more comfortable with. And I think if that gets the job done, that's fine. And that if it makes your layout, you didn't pick wrong at the end of the day. Maybe it would have been easier with the other one, but if it works at the end of the day, it works. So I do think that's also important to know. Gustavo just extended on what he'd said before about using utility classes on components, like using it for a shadow. And that's exactly what I would use a utility class for. You're putting shadows on different things. You want your shadow to always be similar. So you're using the same, like you build out your component, but it needs a shadow. Instead of building the same shadow you've used in other places, a utility class can get the job done there. I left this question in. I'm not going to dive into the top part of it because I think I sort of answered it when I did this card and the different things we can do with this name right here, or name position thing. But it was, you have a layout with the username on top right when someone signs in. If the name has too many characters that would overflow the designated space, how do we set how many letters should appear and not mess things up around it? I think that you can have maybe a dynamic layout that can adjust if somebody has a really long name is an option. It gets a little bit tricky after that because if somebody has a really long name and you have to cut it somewhere, it can be hard. Like, how do you decide? It's probably going to cut in the middle of a name. It's not going to cut at, like, right? I don't know how many characters, depends on the design. So maybe you could have something, or honestly, like, you do need, if the design is so rigid that you can't have the name, like here, if this was shorter and it's one, my layout's not changing, right? That says graphic. And then if I add designer, well, now it's on 2 lines. And I think a layout needs to be able to do that. And if this was a really, really long title, the layout is going to adjust that is longer than the content on the right side. Like, it doesn't look pretty, but my layout can adapt to that. I do think that is important. So, if it's so rigid that it has to be 1 line and it can't, like, can you not add a second line that if it has to wrap, then it wraps? I don't know. That's my opinion on that. Is it better to use JavaScript? Clamps even, like, I wouldn't want to shrink the text down using JavaScript either to make it fit. I think the design needs to be able to adapt at least a little bit based on the content. I think one thing that's super, super important, and actually I completely forgot that. The first week, one of the main topics we're going to be covering is why is CSS different from other languages and why is it kind of weird? Like, that's a big topic that we're going to be talking about. And the things we have to think about with CSS that are different from other languages. And one of them is that it needs to be adaptable. And that we don't know what our design, like, JavaScript is doing what it's told to do. CSS, it's hoping to get it right almost, right? Like, you don't know if the user's on a 2-inch screen or a 50-inch TV. And you have to come up with everything in between and hope that it looks good. That's not the type of constraint we're used to. And it's kind of weird and kind of strange. And there's actually an external, we're going to be watching a video from, I think it's Miriam Susan, that goes into that. And then I'm really going to dive deep onto that topic as well. Because it is a big part of why people struggle with CSS. Our designs can't be static. That was designed in 2000, not in 2020. The pixel perfect, we're not talking pixel perfect in the chat. I know some people's jobs require it. I'm sorry for you if that's the case. But yeah, I think things need to be able to adapt, and the content will change, the screen sizes will change. People will hit Control plus 10 times to make the fonts bigger. You don't know what the situation is, and your CSS has to be able to adapt to whatever situation it's thrown at, sort of. Just checking the chat again. some talk about Sass mix-ins. We won't. Some people asked if I'm going to be talking about Sass in the course. I'm really keeping this one to be CSS only. Yeah, CSS only. Just to recover that. This came up from someone who did my responsive design bootcamp on Scrimba. They say this helps because it makes it easy to know what font size things are going to be. And why I don't, in my responsive design bootcamp, I recommended not to do this. Oop. Don't know why Discord just opened, but okay. So the reason that I do this, the reason I recommended against doing this is if somebody increased their font size in their browser, they generally did it for a reason. Now, because you're doing it as a percentage, you're not breaking that in the sense that you're still scaling things. If you set this as like a fixed, like font size is 10 pixels, and then you're working from there, that will break the customization that the user had done on their browser. So 10 pixels is bad. This isn't necessarily bad, but I think it's unnecessary. And if they set their font size to be really big, and then you're shrinking down their default font size and then sort of trying to lock them into the font sizes you want, it's going to scale there and then scale back. So it might not be the end of the world. But I just think that it's an unnecessary step. That's just in a little bit of my personal opinion, but I do think like if you can avoid resetting the default font size, that it's not a bad thing. I do realize that then, because you're thinking 35 pixels, but you don't know it's really 35 pixels, I guess, is where I'm getting to at the end. And it goes a bit to the adaptability of our websites, like I was just talking about. We need them to be able to adapt, and you don't know what the circumstances are, so you can't assume that's actually 35 pixels is part of it. The same person asked, what is a better approach? I'm going to be talking a bit about resets. There might be another question here too about CSS reset. So we're going to use one. I'm going to be talking about why I'm doing what I am in it. And can we use this? You can use this if you want. Normalize has its purpose too. Normalize fixes some other things that this isn't doing. There are some good things in Normalize still that this doesn't cover. Some of those things we're going to be doing in the reset we build. And I think everybody, if you're doing your own stuff, like you're a freelancer or you're just working on your own projects, you'll probably develop your own reset over time. If you don't have one, you can use the one we're going to use, and it's probably going to adapt from there. I think everybody sort of has their own that shapes and moves and becomes something over time, the more websites you create. The one thing I don't like the margin padding 0 on this, even though I end up taking the margin and padding off of most elements anyway. But I find it's a little bit heavy-handed. And so I do like the box sizing border box, but I find this is a little more heavy-handed than what I want to do, especially because then if I have a bullet list, like a UL, I don't want my padding to be 0 unless I'm like if I did this, I'm forced then to turn off the styling of my lists, like the list style none, right? Because I've taken this off, so then the bullets are going to be sort of falling off the page or whatever it is, like the alignment of things falls off, or the padding 0 might even screw up the positioning of the bullets. So then the next thing I have to do is turn off the styling of my list. But what if I have lists that should be bullet lists or numbered lists? Then you have to restyle it. And I find like you're doing a little more work than maybe you have to be doing. So that's why I don't like doing the margin padding 0 on everything. But I do end up doing it on a lot of things. This question I just wanted to bring up. I'm not going to dive too deep into it, but an elegant solution to get something to go from display none to display block. I worked really hard on something to get this to happen. I don't even think I did it the right way. You don't. There's not really a way. An elegant solution, you can't go from display none to display block because you can't transition or animate between those properties. So that is, I'm not going to be going specifically into what can or can't be animated, but we're going to be looking at the tools. Like part of this course too, when you come out of the course, you're not going to know everything there is to know about CSS because I can't make a course that does that. But the idea with this is that you're coming in able to find answers to these types of things quicker than you did before. That is part of what I want to be doing. So you can find, is this possible? The way that I've done it in the past is that I go from display none to display block, and then once that I have an event like a listener anyway for the animation, and then once that happens, so I'm transitioning from display none to display block, setting an opacity of 0, and so it goes display none, display block, opacity 0, and then display block with opacity 1. I think an easier thing to do is just display block or whatever it is with opacity of 0, and like, or this is if it's positioned on top, but you could put like a pointer events none, and then people can click through it. It's like it's not there. So if it's a modal, like you could have the modal in front that has an opacity of 0 that people don't interact with. But integrating video on a site or slide, I would just use a video element. I don't know. And they also asked about the audio. Like it's getting a little bit more into JavaScript that I want to be diving into in this course. One of the reasons I did leave these up here actually was I wanted to mention, CBEC's been very good at pushing the Discord, but I wanted to leave these up as these are great types of questions to ask in the Discord channel. There's lots of people with lots of different experience in there, and people have probably done stuff like that. So you can get lots of different input from different people. Let me just check the chat before I get to that next one, actually. Normalize? Try. Oh, someone's asking what normalize is. Yeah, the idea with normalize, as instead of resetting everything just like this, it tries to get the behavior of everything to be the same between all of our browsers. And one thing I'm going to recommend now, since I have people here, is if you're going to use something like normalize, because you've heard that it's good and you're going to put it in your site, come and read and see what it is. Let's take this and just put it in the browser. Or in the browser, in VS Code here for a second, to take a look at what this is doing. Because they do a really nice job documenting it. And a lot of people, they just put normalize in there and they don't know why. But you can see like they're setting a default line height, but then they're saying why. It corrects the line height on all browsers. Now, to me, that's really tight, but it's making sure, I don't know what browser has a different line height, but it's saying that there must be some that have different line heights as a default, so now they're all the same. And then it's doing this because prevent adjustments of font size after orientation change on iOS. Well, that's kind of useful. Okay, that's a cool thing to have. And then, well, that one we know. Main display block, I don't know if you really need that anymore. Here they're doing different things for font sizes and stuff. So like article context in Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. Anyway, you get the idea. They're documenting why they're making these changes here. Now, if you're putting your own H1 font size and margin on something, do you need this? Probably not. So like, or even like it gets into the pre, are you using a pre? Probably not. Do you need it? No. But I think reading and looking at these things and getting ideas from them is super, super useful, because even if you don't end up using normalize, like one thing we're definitely going to be doing is, where is it? This is all, I mean, form inputs are a disaster, right? So like they're like here. Button input, option group, select text area, font family, inherit. I think that's like, we need to do that almost. I don't know. I don't even understand how they didn't make that a default, but it's not. So like they're making sure that they're behaving the way you'd expect them to. This is for really, I remember the day where if you put an image in a link, you'd get the blue box around the image. I don't miss those days. You can see like there's tons of stuff in here you might never use. But it's definitely worth, like, if ever you are using it, read and see what it's doing, and they've explained why they're doing it. So I think that's really cool. And you can learn a lot about the purpose of things when you're using them just by doing that. And yeah, Peter, I think it's just, I use a lot of background patterns, some of which look either amazing. I mean, for normal, the background pattern shouldn't look different on different browsers. But it's, I mean, normalize is just a CSS file, so you could literally just include this at the top of your own CSS file and then keep writing your own CSS underneath it. If I'm doing Sass, I could have that. I have a reset.scss partial, so I import that before the rest of my files. But if you're writing regular CSS, I would just have that at the top and delete any of the stuff in there I'm not using. would be the simplest way to do it. I don't think we need a lot of the stuff that it does now, but for background images, is there anything in here? Background image? I don't think there's anything about backgrounds. Remove the gray background of active links on IE10. I'm surprised to hear that there's different things with background patterns, Peter, between browsers. I never knew that. I'd like to see it. Oh, the finer ones don't always show perfectly. That you might not be able to do much about. Even fonts render differently between browsers. There's some stuff we can definitely do for fonts. But if it's really thin lines, it can even be different between Windows and Mac, for example. Like there's annoying things there sometimes. Here again, like this person had a lot of questions, and I just left this in here. What is like talking about scroll effects, talking about clip path not working. If ever there's these types of questions, please come to the Discord, because they're really hard to answer. Even if it's like a DM, if it's an email, they're really hard for me to answer these types of questions if I don't see the website where it's happening. On the Discord, you can share a link, you can make a code pen, you can take screenshots and show us a screenshot, whatever it is. And there's lots of people, again, that are always willing to help out. So with these, I think if you have like a longer question or something that's really specific to the site you're working on and not sort of an idea or a theoretical question, I do think that they're very good for the Discord and all of that. And I think, I'm starting to, my throat is getting very itchy. I'm going to pour myself the last of my coffee. And if anybody has any other questions, I will gladly take them. But that is everything that I had for this. So yeah, I'll gladly take more questions or anything else. I find I'm so close on this camera. I don't know if it's zoomed in more than other things, but I feel so close to everybody. Yeah, if anybody has any other questions, please let me know. It can be course related, it can just be general ideas, it can be on things that we've covered. I can stick around for another little bit of time. Yeah, it's been about 2 hours, so we're pretty much on schedule of where I wanted to be. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this. I hope that you found it, I've been here for 2 hours now. I hope you found it was worth your time. I hope that you enjoyed the lesson that we went over and all this, the questions that I've been going through now. The massager's feedback. Awesome to see you don't know everything. Oh, I think that's super, super important to know. It's frustrating sometimes when you're watching people with tutorials where everything seems perfect, because it's not the reality. I think one nice thing with live streaming is whether it's on Twitch or YouTube or things like this, and it's something I definitely want to make part of the course, of showing you how I figure things out. I think that's such a useful skill. And yeah, I think it's really important if you're watching tutorials, even like you're watching someone write something complicated in JavaScript and they're just like nailing it first time, and you're sitting there going like, I'm never gonna know how to do that. They didn't know either. Like they researched it for that video and then they made it work and they debugged it and they did all of that, and then they made a video to show you how to do it. So, and it's, part of the YouTube problem is people want to know how to do things. They don't want to see the problem solving behind it first, even though that's probably the more useful skill. Oh, I see a couple questions about Master Sass. I'm hoping to have that open by January. I have to re-record a lot of it because of the changes they made with Dart Sass. So once this course is up and running and is done, then I'm going to be jumping in and updating that one, and then probably I'm aiming for a January release. Maybe, I don't want to say earlier, because I have to do a whole section that I never finished, and I might be doing more sections than were originally there. I don't know yet. It's a really big course. It was like 15 hours of content, and there's not all of it done, I think. I had like the last big project to do, so yeah. But I'm hoping for January on that one. I think I can get it opened again by then. Yeah, access. I don't want to give access to the existing version, just because, again, it's out of date with what the current state of SAS is. There's a few things in it that aren't, that I just think I should re-record anyway. So I know some people are. I've been getting a lot of questions about it, so obviously there's some demand for it. So there is some pressure for me on there to get it done, but I'm not even thinking about it right now until it's ready. Maybe if I can get it ready earlier, maybe what I'll do is give people who have this course or my boot camp like an early access or something like that before I relaunch it to the general public. Because one of the problems too is like there's the whole launch thing that I have to do. But if I can get all the content ready, maybe I do like sort of like we did a pre-release here. The advantage with that pre-release is all the content would be ready for it. So maybe I'll look at doing something like that, but I'm not promising anything yet. Fabian, no problem for the live stream. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for being here. Brent, can't wait to see a good SAS course. Yeah, I think one of the problems with a lot of courses like that I've seen is what I mentioned before, where people write stuff, but they don't explain why they're doing things enough. That's another reason why the reason that my SAS course is so out of date is the problem is like I have all the sections where we're learning how something works, and it's just like here's how to do loops, and here's how to do mixins, and here's how extends work. But then I use all of them in a project, and we have like several projects that are built out, and like I mean, those things still work, so maybe those don't have to be redone, but the project I'm doing them in, I'm using imports, and those have to get changed. And so, like, it's, you know, like, it's not, a lot of the content is probably, is still good, but the projects I'm building are using one of the core things that is getting changed. So it's a little frustrating there. So a lot of the project parts, I think, have to be redone. But I have also completely changed, it's been 2 years since I did that course. And I want to up the quality of it a little bit because I think I've gotten better at doing all this stuff in the last 2 years. And also, I forget what I was going to say, but there was another reason why I don't want to do it yet. Bye, Peter. Thanks for being here. Molnair, thank you for being here. Ben, thanks a lot. The massagers, bye. Thanks for being here. Thanks, guys. This was a lot of fun. I see the numbers are dropping off. I think I'm going to go too. But I really appreciate you all hanging out with me for this long. I really, really enjoyed this. I always like doing live streams. So as I did say, I'm going to have live streams during the course itself too. We're going to have 3 of them, 1 for each week. And you guys will have access to all of that and all future updates. So when I do the relaunch of the course in the future, I'm going to be adding 2 more modules, and then I'll have lives that go with those as well. So I mean, you guys will always have access to those whenever they do happen. The one thing I'm going to say before I let everyone go is if you have any questions specific to the course, you can shoot me an email. You just reply to one of the emails I've sent you and I'll get it. No problem at all. If it's about, I'm going to be sending weekly updates still. So next week I'll send an update about the progress I've made. And once I know I'd given a projected launch date and I think I've already missed it. But I'll once I am more firm on the launch date, I'll definitely be letting you guys know. And if there's early access to anything, I'll definitely be letting everybody know about that. So you'll still be getting updates from me. Maybe if it takes me longer than I think it's going to take me, I'll do another live stream too, just because to say thank you to all you guys. Eric, Peter, Jolyn, Ideas al Cuadro, Lays. Awesome, guys. Thank you all so very much. And one more. Oh, that's a really good question, John. Will it be a drip course like Conquering Responsive Designs or dropping all the content at once? Hybrid between the two. I'm not going to do a daily drip because I think Oh, Peter, yeah, one thing definitely, sorry, I'll come back to your question, John. Peter just said better late and good than rushed and less good. That's why it's not out yet. I'm never going to rush. Quality is king for me. So I'm going to make sure it's exactly the course I want it to be, and the quality is really, really high. So I won't rush it, but I'm pretty sure I can have it when I want it to be ready. But I'll never, ever rush any of my projects. So you guys are getting full quality. Don't worry about that. As far as it being a drip course, it will be dripped over 3 weeks, but it's not going to be daily content. One, I want to give your inboxes a little bit of rest. But I also think the type of content's a little bit different. And it sort of lets people digest, like do that week at their own pace. And then we'll do a live stream at the end of the week. So that live stream sort of will wrap everything up, cover the material, go back over, answer questions, dive deeper into stuff, and then we'll move on to the next one, which builds. So it's the same idea in the sense that each week builds on top of the previous week. So it dives into new things, but those new things rely on what we've already learned. So that style is a bit of the same, and it's, as I said, it will be three separate weeks of content. I also like doing that because it hits the brakes a little bit, because people with courses like consuming everything at once, and they don't really learn. So I want to try and force people to learn as much as they can. And I think by pumping the brakes and forcing, like, okay, you only have part of the content, you might as well take your time with it, I think can help a little bit with that as well. And I think it helps keep people engaged, because then they get the email that there's more content, and then they dive into it a little bit. Whereas when you get everything, you start strong and then you just disappear. I think the lives will help with that too. Pyro, I'm just going to say Pyro. Glad I bought Demystified, can't wait for it. I'm super glad too. I'm so excited for this course. It's really a course, I think I said it at the beginning, but this is really going to be something that I wish I had, like, not when I first started writing CSS, but when I started realizing that CSS was kind of hard. This is what this, like, it's really for, like, man, CSS isn't super, it's not just background blue and color white. Like, there's more to it than that, and you start getting into layouts and things are kind of tricky and kind of weird, and you're not sure where to, like, this is what I want this, it's the course I would have wanted then. Chetan is asking if I have a video covering my live stream setup. I don't. You have any questions about it? I can answer some of them now. I don't have much of a fancy setup though. I have, like, I always see these like Twitch streamers and YouTube people that have like these amazing desks and all these fancy things. Like, I'm as basic as you can get. Well, maybe not as basic. I have some fancy colored lights, but they're even like the budget lights. Tim, if you want access to the Discord server for this course now, you can DM Seebeck and he'll grant you the role. I'm trying to look to see if there's a way that I can do it automatically, but I can't find anything that's going to do it. So we might be manually doing it all anyway. But you guys can hang out in there, but there's nothing, you can hang out just in the Discord right now anyway. But if you do want access to that one, but once I start actually using that specific thing, I'll be sending an email with instructions to make sure that everybody can get into the right place. So once we've sort of ironed out all the details. Bye, Mel. I don't see any other questions coming in. I'll wait. I know the chat's a little bit behind, so I'll wait a few seconds just to see. And if not, I can see why it's so far behind. I decide. Chetan, I can set up Discord I have a bot that can add a role based on the invite link people get. The problem is it's only if they're not already in the server. So if anybody's already in the Discord, they won't get the role. And then if they're using a different email than they signed up to I found it like I could do something with Zapier that could add roles to people, but then if they're using a different email, it doesn't work. There's just, I've talked to other people too that have, like I was talking to Kyle from UbDub Simplified. He still does it all manually. I was talking to someone else too. Like, there seems to be this little gap that would make it really easy. And I don't know what the best solution is. I mean, there's so much on Discord that you can automatically do. I've also seen actually another one that has, they set up a bot that you can DM the bot, and then the bot asks you a question, and then if you answer the question right, it assigns the role to you. But I mean, that seems crazy. Hubert, thank you for the great content. No problem. Thank you. Tim, thanks for being here. I can't wait for the course release either. I'm really excited about this one. All right, I've said that a lot. I think the questions seem to be trickling down. So if ever there's anything, either, there's the Discord. If you have general questions about whatever, if it's specific about the course, don't be shy. You can email me and I'll get back to you. And as I said, I'll be giving weekly updates. A few people have been asking me about the curriculum, so maybe I'll do it on the next email. Maybe I'll do a deeper dive into exactly what we'll be covering. I can give a bit more of a detailed breakdown there. I have all my lessons in Notion, so we can sort of see a bigger breakdown of what we'll be doing. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to hit end on this guy, if I can figure out how. It's annoying that everything is different. Just want to learn. Did I work full stack? No. I did not. That's why I don't do a lot of content outside of design. I was a designer. I did print design for 6 years and then on the side started freelancing. I was doing a lot of website design, like UI design. And then I'd made websites since high school as a hobby and said, well, if people are paying me to design their websites, maybe they'll pay me more if I also build their websites. So I started doing that, and I did that for a while. And yeah, and then I eventually became a teacher. Yanis is asking, how old are my kids? They're 8 and 5. One birthday is soon, so almost 9 and 5, but 8 right now, 8 and 5. So they are a handful, but they're good. And man, I've been going back to what I did before. Yeah, when I was building websites as my main source of income, it was, I was doing a lot of design work then too. But that was really, I got heavy into jQuery then. I learned jQuery first and then JavaScript afterward, just because at the time jQuery was so big. And it was easier. There was stuff so much easier. Especially someone that wasn't, I didn't have a background in it, so that also made it easier. And then from there, yeah, then once I started teaching in the class, I started learning some JavaScript, but I never got heavy into it until I started teaching. And even at school, when I was teaching full time, I was freelancing still. I started getting into JavaScript just because I had a bit of extra time. Funny enough, because I was teaching, because at the school I was teaching at, I didn't teach any JavaScript, or the advanced students would ask me about it a little bit, but it was just HTML, CSS. So I started learning it on my own and then using it on the projects I was doing on the side. Same with React. Don't ask me to do any React, but I learned React just because I wanted to a little bit, and then I got brought into a few React projects more recently. But even there, I wasn't doing a lot of React work. It was mostly doing styling of stuff. But if you listen to the Shop Talk show where they talk about front end versus back end, but then they talk about like front of front end and back of front end, where, with how complicated front end has become, I'm definitely a front of the front end type of person. Yeah. Alrighty, so I think I'm going to say goodbye to everybody and have a wonderful end to your day or morning, depending on where you're at. I'll be in touch for updates on the course. Hopefully I see you guys on YouTube. I'll be live streaming next week also on Twitch, so you can catch me there. I'll be working on Style Stage if you want to drop in on that. And I guess until then, I'll see you guys later. Thanks a lot for coming. This was a lot of fun. You got